this live. Wanted to share something very interesting I came across this morning with you guys. Um, a post that was published recently on SciPost, referring to a paper that's been published recently. And the post was titled New Psychological Research Links Atheism to Emotional Suppression. So I thought I'd take a few minutes to share this with you because I think this sort of, at least what's being suggested by this particular study, it highlights what we've mentioned before, which is that atheism, for many people, is an emotional problem. It results from an underlying emotional issue as opposed to it being a rational conclusion. And that's what I want to touch upon in this quick live stream. So it's a very interesting paper. What I will do after this live is I will put the link to the post. You guys can see it here. I'll put the link to this post in the description box, and which further links to the study as well, if anyone's interested in reading that. So basically, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam to everyone that's joining. So basically what this paper is highlighting in regards to this study is that I'm going to read you a few key sections from the post which I think are which will give us context as to what's going on here. So it reads, this new research points to a profound irony that belief and disbelief themselves are shaped in part by what we do with our emotions, said Christopher T. Boris, and this is the individual, the professor, who's written this paper. And then it further goes on to read, and he highlights as to why he got, or the post highlights as to why he got interested in conducting this study and pursuing this. He says, this line of research began with a chance discovery while examining demographic data over a decade ago. It evolved into a 2011 paper that showed that atheists reported less intense positive and negative emotions related to religious believers. So this was something that they stumbled upon originally, and then there was a paper written in regards to this, and then he further developed this or picked up on this research. Further down in the post it reads, compared to religiously affiliated individuals and agnostic non-religious individuals, Boris found that self-identified atheists were more likely to report engaging in emotional suppression. In other words, atheists were more likely to agree with statements such as, when I am feeling positive emotions, I'm careful not to express them. So essentially what he discovered was that, generally speaking, atheists were individuals who engaged in emotional suppression, what he refers to, a term that he uses in his paper and which is highlighted in this post. And what emotional suppression is pointing towards is keeping emotions in, not sharing them, not expressing them. And then further later on, what's developed is the idea that it's this emotional suppression is juxtaposed against emotional regulation, which is the idea that when you go through an experience, the pain, whatever you feel, how do you regulate those emotions? And we'll discuss that as we get to that in a second. But essentially, emotional suppression is the idea that we're keeping emotions in. And what he's discovering is that atheists, self-proclaimed atheists, those who ascribe to atheism, seem to be individuals, as his studies have shown, and he conducted several different experiments, that atheists seem to be individuals who keep emotions in, whether they're positive or negative emotions. They don't share them. It's almost being introvert with your emotions. And then further, so just a part here where Boris first surveyed 1,059 undergraduates, psychology students, regarding their religious beliefs, and had them complete an assessment of their emotion regulation tendencies. And about half of the participants identified as Christian, while 30% identified as agnostic or non-religious, 15% identified as atheists. Now, obviously, this is a small subgroup, a test group that he's conducting this experiment with, of 1,059 people. The remainder identified as Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, or others. Now, based on this initial study, he came to this conclusion that atheists seem to be individuals who suppress their emotions as opposed to other demographics. Further, to better understand why atheism is linked to emotional suppression, Boris conducted an experiment with 247 undergraduates, which found that participants who were instructed to conceal their emotions were less confident in life after death compared to those instructed to feel free to express their emotions. But this was only true amongst those who preferred using suppression over reprisal as an emotional regulation strategy. So what's very interesting here is that he conducts now a further study, which again highlights that atheists seem to be obviously are individuals who deny the hereafter, and this denial seems to be linked to emotional suppression, which we've discussed already. as opposed to emotional regulation. Now, just to give you a bit of context as to what they mean by emotional regulation here, emotional regulation is referring to when you feel an emotion, whether it's positive or negative. Let's assume negative because it'll be easier to work with. When you go through something difficult in your life and you have a negative emotion, emotional regulation as opposed to emotional suppression is that to deal with that emotion, you change the way you think about the situation which resulted in that emotion. So let me repeat that again. Emotional regulation is when, to deal with a particular emotion, assuming it's negative, just for the sake of this example, to deal with that negative emotion, you change the way you see that situation which resulted in that emotion, right? So it seems like from his studies that atheists seem to be individuals who incline towards emotional suppression, which is they don't deal with it, they just keep it in, and this pents up. Now, I'm going to highlight and share my thoughts in regards to how this may link to the problem of evil in a second. But let's continue to see what he says. And then further in the post, it reads, in a second experiment, 8 atheists and 8 religious affiliated undergraduates were recorded as they described a recent experience that made them feel frustrated or annoyed, and a recent experience that made them feel happy or joyful. A sample of 100 undergraduates then watched the videos with the sound of with the sound off, and rated each speaker's emotional expressiveness, trustworthiness, and likability. The participants who watched the videos were unaware of each speaker's affiliation. So essentially, another further experiment was conducted where eight atheists and 8 religious people were sat down, they were recorded, and they were asked to, share the experiences or how they felt about a positive experience and a negative experience. And those recordings were played to other students, 100 other students, with the sound turned off, and they had no knowledge of who was an atheist or who was a non-atheist or a religious person. And what they found in regards to this was Boris found that the atheists were seen as less emotionally expressive on average compared to the religiously affiliated individuals, especially when it came to displays of positive emotion. So again, this is very interesting, looking at all of the previous studies which have been done as well. And then further, it says in the post, atheists are more likely, and this is a conclusion that's made based on all of these studies, atheists are more likely to manage their emotions by thinking differently. Atheists are not more likely, let me repeat that again, atheists are not more likely to manage their emotions by thinking differently about situations. Atheists are more likely to resist expressing their emotions. And then at the end, near the end, it says, why the link? So here's what it says. Past research has shown that spiritual experience has been linked to positive emotions, which restricted expression is especially likely to squash. It looks like expressive suppression drives atheism rather than vice versa. So what really struck me was this idea, which again, going back, says atheists are more likely to manage their emotions by thinking differently about, let me repeat that again. Atheists are not more likely to manage their emotions by thinking differently about the situation. Atheists are more likely to resist expressing their emotions. Now, this is, I think, the crux of the matter here, and something that I've mentioned before and highlighted before, which is, look, we know the nature of life from the Islamic perspective. Life is a test. Obviously, atheists won't agree to this right now, whatever the case is. The point is, something atheists and theists and Muslims would agree upon is that life is difficult. We go through hardships, we go through trials, we go through tribulations. Now, what seems to happen with atheists, and this is something I've concluded prior to coming across this, is atheists seem to be individuals who go through a difficult time in their life. They go through a trauma. Things happen, right? It happen with all of us. But it's how they deal with that experience which leads to their atheism. Now, atheists, as per this study, seem to be individuals who suppress their emotions. They keep things in. They don't deal with them they don't deal with them as far as, emotional regulation is concerned, or from that perspective, which is to try to deal with that emotion by trying to reinterpret and understand what's just happened, maybe in the correct light. They just keep it in, suppress it, hold on to it, and this results, it's very hot in the UK at the moment. We're experiencing a heat wave, hence I'm trying to keep myself hydrated, so excuse me for drinking while I'm trying to get the point across. But let me gather my thoughts again. So what atheists seem to do when they go through something very difficult in their life, or people that eventually become atheists, they have this tendency to suppress emotions, hold on to emotions, not share them, not express them. Therefore, they don't have the opportunity to reinterpret or understand what's just happened, and they end up giving a an analysis to themselves in regards to what's happened. In most cases, if they go through something difficult, a trauma, a difficult time, they end up blaming God. They end up turning away from God. They end up developing a negative perception of who God is. And this then eventually leads to the atheism, which later then they try to justify through rational means. But that's something that happens after, not initially. As opposed to people that are more expressive, when they go through a trauma, they may not be religious to start with, but they may express it to someone else. They may speak to someone else about it, who may be able to give them context as to what's happened, which allows them to understand what's happened, and therefore they regulate their emotions by reinterpreting or understanding the occurrence which led to that emotion in the first place. Or, alhamdulillah, all thanks and praises belongs to God. Those that do get an opportunity to engage with revelation from God, read, for example, the Quran, and they would understand very clearly that life is a test. You go through hardships and trials and tribulations, and there are wisdoms behind what you go through. There is a reason, there is a wisdom. And this I'm not going to go into right now, because this is something that I've covered in several previous videos on this channel. So anyone that's interested in the problem of evil, understanding life from an Islamic perspective, understanding suffering from an Islamic perspective, I did actually a recent video on that, which I'll link under this video too. You guys can go check it out there. So to conclude, again, with atheists, obviously, what's the biggest argument they posit against religion and God? The problem of evil, right? That highlights essentially what's been highlighted in this paper, which is they seem to misinterpret reality, a traumatic experience. They end up blaming God. They end up developing a hatred or disliking towards God or the concept of God and religion. And then they adopt atheism, which is a natural fit for that state that person is in. As opposed to really trying to sit down and evaluate and understand what's just occurred and give that occurrence, that event, the correct meaning, which will then regulate the emotions in the correct way. It's very powerful if you think of it from that perspective. So if you're an atheist, first and foremost, let me say the intent here is not to take a dig at you as an individual. I would encourage you to really assess your atheism. What was it that led you to atheism? What led you to becoming an atheist? And if it was an occurrence in your life which you just couldn't understand, you ended up blaming God, then maybe you just need to go back to that time in your mind psychologically at least and reevaluate it and try to re-understand what happened and give that occurrence the correct meaning. And at the very least, you'll by doing so, by regulating your emotions in that way, it will remove that trauma and it'll give you freedom from that perspective, from a past traumatic experience. Because once you've understood what happened correctly, the emotions are changed. There's a release there. So at least you'll benefit in that way. And if anyone wants to look further, I encourage you to look into Islam, because Islam provides a comprehensive account to life and what life is all about and why we suffer and why we go through hardships. And once you understand and the dots connect, well, you're much better able to deal with your emotions and understand reality for what it is. Doesn't mean you won't feel pain or heartbreak and things like this. Sure you will, but you'll be able to regulate yourself much better from that perspective. So, that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And something for us to, especially Muslims, to think about as well, is hopefully you can appreciate that this whole atheist movement, is it's not a rational movement. It's not rational from the perspective of history, something I've highlighted before, because it links in with modernism and postmodernism, and it's not rational from the perspective of what's going on an individual level, something we've highlighted today, which is, it seems to be an emotional position, which is later justified as rational. Now, does this study conclusively prove atheism is an emotionally acquired position? No, it doesn't. Let's be nuanced and honest here. No, it doesn't. Because science is fluid. No study for that matter is absolute. There's always holes, there's always gaps, something that's mentioned in this post as well. And I'm sure is mentioned in the paper as well. So it's not conclusive proof, but there's something here, there's smoke. There's something that we can appreciate and understand, which links to many other points we've made in the past, and should get us to reflect. Anyway, let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you in regards to this, and make sure to share this with any people that you feel this may benefit. Till next time, may Allah bless you guys. Take care. I'll speak to you later. Assalamu alaikum.